Your instinct can kick in. Like during the COVID modeling, everything was like the greatest disasters in terms of numbers never came true. And then the apologists would be like, well, with modeling, it's never an exact science. It can go a little this way, little that. But when each and every single time it's skewed in the same direction, that's intentional. That's misconduct. That's fraud.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show.
Hello, everyone.
It's Jason and Dimitri coming at you. Having an episode here today on doing your own research and the benefits or possibly the pratfalls of that. And is it pratfalls or pitfalls? Whatever.
What on earth is a pratfall?
I don't know. I don't know if that's even a word. I think it's a word. Maybe I meant to say pitfalls. Either way, I think that's the thing with this. Doing your own research is just it can be a very empowering thing to do. I think it's kind of crucial to do, and I think we're going to be talking about that a lot in the show. As we sort of tumble further down the rabbit hole in this technological phantasmagoria of ours. We want to have something that we can kind of rely on more and more, that we can trust, and our trust in our institutions are failing, our trust in sort of authority is failing, and I think it's like we have to look inward and sort of do what people used to do and go back to empirical data and go back to trusting our instincts to some extent, but also the research we do and the research those of us we trust do, and sort of building from the ground up again. And I think that's almost maybe not. I think at this stage anyway, in this sort of transition stage where we're going from sort of one type of paradigm to another, this is a good starting point to build on.
So what paradigm are we in and what paradigm are we going to?
Okay, so I don't know how long we've been in this, but maybe since the, end of World War II or something, or at least early 20th century. This idea that we've had institutions, governments, big organizations, ever since the Industrial Revolution, or ever since science really became a driver of industry and a driver of progress and technology. We've had this more and more. We've become reliant on those who are able to provide this sort of magical service to us. And as the technology has gotten more complex and more specialized in many ways, there's a disparity between those who are actually creating it and those who are consuming it, which is
disparity in,
for example, like some people know how to program and code and create knowledge. A lot of the things that people use nowadays.
As things become more complex, the everyday person simply can't understand them anymore.
Right. I mean, you can think of this there's different sort of silos for this. So like in the old days, it would be like, you'd go on an airplane and you'd be flying and, the pilots know presumably most of what's going on there. The engineers and the mechanics know how to build the planes and how to maintain it. But the average person is just kind of getting on the plane. It's like, okay, this thing flies. I've heard that it flies. I've seen other people fly. So I'm going to put my trust in this, that they know what they're doing. And
that may be one of the last industries people still have a lot of trust in.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, it's funny that it's just, that everybody worries about all these other, these other things that are so much less impactful. Like, actually, I just started watching that Society of Snow about that Andes crash.
I heard, yeah.
And it's like, it's a pretty important, you're really taking your life in your hand. It's like...
Yeah, like when people say our institutions are failing us, you really couldn't say the aviation institution is failing us.
No,
like the safety is just outstanding, right? It might not be quite the
Right.
service it once was.
Right. Yeah,
but
the safety, the fact that they're able to fly through the air and bring us to another country, fairly quickly is pretty amazing. Yeah, it's really still a marvel, but it's but yeah, you're right. Like,
But it's also very tight, like tried and tested technology. Like the average airplane today isn't really fundamentally different from something 50, 60 years ago.
right. Yeah,
So
they tried
maybe
to do that
that's-
with the
it's-
Concorde, and it was like,
Yeah, we call it technology in a sense, but it's more been like a complete evolution route. The revolution is over. Whereas the other processes you're talking about, like coding and stuff, we're still like really like in a permanent infancy state.
well, we are, but we're also, those things are more ubiquitous, so they're more, people are using the products more often, so that disparity is more and more. Still remember the day where I would tell people that what I do for a living, and they'd be like, "Oh, okay, so you work with computers?" And I'm like, "Well, not really," but it's like, that kind of mindset just doesn't work anymore. Like, even as a layman, you can't just be like computers. It's like, yeah, you use computers for everything. So like, there becomes more and more of a trust, I think, for the average person, that people sort of running various parts of their lives know what they're doing, and they're really just relying on the fact that they know what they're doing.
And the increased complexity makes it really hard to be a well-rounded generalist anymore.
Right.
Like, back in the day, you live in a small town. I'll call Jim. He's a piece of my barber, my plumber, my electrician. He knows a little bit of everything.
A little bit of everything, and yeah.
But now the complexity is such that there's no way that one person could be that well-rounded. Yeah. So therefore, we defer our responsibilities in a sense to a higher power more and more often.
Yeah, I think of auto mechanics. Like my grandfather had trucks and cars all over his yard, and he was a mechanic, and he would sort of like, just bring your car and I'll tinker around or whatever, and he'd figure something out. But like, imagine like bringing a Tesla, and he'd be like, well, I don't know what the hell's going on here. So like,
or the international monetary system, or anything, like just everything is way more complex.
Right. Yeah. So I guess just to sort of finish off answering your question, like the old paradigm is one where we trusted institutions, and we trusted others to sort of, we offloaded a lot of the work of understanding how the world works to other people, and then, which was how, as a society, we grew, because specialization allowed us to, focus on one thing, and we could rely on other people to do other things. But I do think that we're now, shifting to another age, I guess, where we have to take some of that back, and we have to take some of the onus of that back.
As the world population grows and education becomes more equal globally, I think the average person is becoming a much more highly trained in a variety of subjects that 20 years ago, it's like going to university. When we were younger, it was a very small selection of people that went to university. If you just wanted to learn a trade, you went to college, sort of thing. Now, everyone's going to university. Mm-hmm. So globally, you would think the average person, it's tough, because I would say, in one hand, you think the average person wants to know more and wants to be part of the process more and understand more. But I also feel like there's a cultural thing seeping in, that part of that is an indoctrination where I just know how difficult things are. So I'm going to make sure, because I am educated, I'm going to defer to an expert. Mm. It's almost like deferring to an expert is the hallmark of an educated man.
Well, yeah.
It's strange, right? Instead of taking on that sort of do-it-yourself attitude, it's like, well, I understand. It's kind of like Socrates. I only know how little I know.
Right.
So therefore, I'm going to defer back to the experts. And we get stuck in this loop a little bit.
Well, I think at some point, people elevated to, universities to a status that maybe they didn't deserve to be. Well,
they were the top. So whether they actually achieved what they said they were going to achieve or not, back in the day, you could go get like a geography, 4-year Bachelor of Arts sort of thing, and become like the Minister of the Environment.
Yeah, no,
right?
it's true. It's true. But isn't it strange though? Because it's like everybody I know, prior to university, who instead of going to university went to college and picked up a trade. Like, they're the ones who are successful now. Like, they're the ones who have, they're banking money. Like, yeah, it was a more narrow field, and maybe just because of their studies, they didn't spend those 4 or 5 years. Like, what did we do in university? Like, we talked about philosophy for the most part.
But you wouldn't say the person that is more successful in 2023, 24, 25 is the person that actually follows status quo versus going off and being maverick and doing your own thing. Like I think a university kind of in a sense teaches you to be ultimately independent. You learn how to learn. Whereas when you go to a trade school, you learn your specific skill set. You went to this school, this is your diploma, go make some money, off you go. I feel like people who follow status quo are promoted and rewarded at a higher frequency. And that status quo comes with the many caveats. One would be like, do you put your pronouns in front of on your business card? Guess you're not getting promoted, or do you go with the overgeneralized narrative each and every single time? Oh, who is this one person thinking they know better? Better not promote Bob. I think there's a reward that's going into following status quo that is diminishing the potential in every person. And we don't even know it's happening to us.
Yeah.
Something like that.
I can see that, yeah.
So it's strange because we have the knowledge, but it's like we're such a, it's like a dog. Like you go to try to train a dog. Smart dogs are much easier to train than stupid dogs. Right? So now we are smarter, but in a sense, we're also easier to be more indoctrinated. And by smarter, I mean more knowledgeable.
Yeah.
Because we understand the scope of what we're trying, like, oh my God, because it's kind of in a sense they're right. Like an ignorant person's like, if I was Putin, I would just do this, and it's shit, but you have no idea the level of complexity that the people are trying to achieve in anything, right? But when you actually understand the level of complexity, you know enough not to even touch it.
Yeah. I wonder how much, like I know people who are, like I wonder how much education even has to do with it, because I really do think that this is almost like people have choices. Like I know some people who are very uneducated, but smart, like who I would call smart, because it's like they know what they know about life or whatever, and they might not be able to talk about the nuances of some topic, but they know enough to be like, to sort of say like, look, I'm not an expert in this field. This is what I feel based on what I know. But they're smart enough to sort of have that caveat and to make sure they express that, and then to, when they do know something well, kind of gradually increase their confidence in it and display it that way, as opposed to I think a lot of people that have gone to universities that have gotten, it's almost like they feel like they were given a stamp of approval, and so anything, it's like, well, I must know, like everybody knows that people
for sure.
follow this.
Or if I bump into it all the time on X, where people oh, so you think you're an expert? It's kind of like being back in your original first year lecture halls with 1,000 people, and you want to raise your hand and ask a question. Right. And you're so afraid to do so because the prof is just going to call you out in front of 1,500 people. Right. That kind of thing. And you're right. It's kind of more of a spiritual or personality thing. We don't do enough hand raising anymore. It's like we've been, because even from that very day, you're indoctrinated. Just put your head down, take your notes, write your test, get your diploma, get out. Right. Yeah. Don't ruffle any feathers. It's rare that you had an actual lecture where it was supported full-heartedly to have an open debate, and I can understand you want to control it because the whole thing can go in the wrong direction. But in general, in society, we have a lot more self-censorship than I would have ever thought. And I always feel like, and we've been through this before, is it collectivism or is it individualism that's going to take us to the next stage? And I always come back to individualism. Obviously with collaboration between individuals, but not an over-centralizing sort of narrative on anything. It really brings it back to are we, when you look at the kings and queens of feudalism in Europe, what did they say to the masses that justified the king to have these powers?
That he was, for the most part, it's that they were sort of divined by God.
Right. He had the ultimate authority. So much ultimate, it's literally God said this man should be the one who runs you.
Try and one up that one.
Who are you to go against the king and God? Right? Okay, I'll just take my pitchfork and work in my field now. Yeah. Right? And it shamed you. You just just look how big his house is. He's got a castle. I got a little straw hut. And God put him there? Whatever.
He's you can't come back with that.
It's the ultimate, just go shut the fuck up. You don't know what, and I can understand from a sort of political system why they would want to do that. I'm sure that even the kings, for the most part, believe God didn't put them there, but they needed to utilize religion to justify their power over the people. Right? And then, as the printing press made its way through Europe and the average person was becoming smarter, they just simply couldn't keep that ruse up any longer. Yeah. And you get Magna Carta and you got the West and liberal democracy and off you go. It was through the strength of the individual. But now the new gods, the new experts are your Microsofts and Apples and CDC and FDA and the White House. You know, they're just, it's fragmented, but they are these, you know, citadels in the sky that the average person, how dareth touch such a thing?
It's an interesting comparison. Like as soon as you said that about the printing press and sort of the dissemination of knowledge that came with that, it's really the internet and everything.
Weren't they doing their own research by reading?
Yeah, exactly. And so we're sort of just in that next stage of that. And you're right.
Who are you to read the Bible and tell the priest what to believe, right? Like seriously, you think they didn't have the same debates in some level?
Yeah. But on some level, and I will say, so I guess the contention here is that doing your own research is overall probably a good thing. But I would wonder, you know, is it, you know, there's downsides to that, right? Like there are people who are experts in the field, and there are people who are, you know, by virtue of the fact of where they are in their job or their studies or whatever it is, just know more about some subject than another person might. So it's almost like getting this balance right. Like it's like do your own research, but make sure you do it right. And that's the hard thing.
Who teaches anybody that these days? Is that actually, I don't know because I don't have kids, but are they actually teaching young people, or are they just going up to the oracle of ChatGPT? And like whatever the oracle has a summarizer, right. You know, back in the day, like it was bad enough you had like Google skewed links, but at least you had 15 choices to pick between. Right.
Yeah.
Now you literally go into ChatGPT, forget your 15 choices. Yeah. You touch the crystal ball and out comes your one single answer.
Right.
Sanitized by whoever puts the garbage in. Garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
Right. And so now to go from a ChatGPT experience back to a Google looking at links experience is that one extra step that kids aren't going to want to do. Mm-hmm. Right. So
yeah, they're not going to say like, give me an alternate suggestion.
Can I have 10 ChatGPT different answers? You know, like that would be ideal.
It's interesting that it can do that because then it's like, how is it determining? Like if you ask it to give you an answer and then you ask it to give you a better answer, it will give you sort of an almost qualitatively better answer. So it's like, well, why didn't you just give the first answer? You know, it's actually interesting what's kind of going on there. But yeah, I see what you mean. It's like reducing more and more our options as a consumer of knowledge, like very much like an oracle. So it's like we don't even need to, like our choice doesn't have to play into it anymore. So there's an answer and that's it.
And I just, in general, I feel like there's going to be, because people are lazy and people just want to go status quo and they want to get promoted and life is expensive. And you're going to have, you know, debt, slavery through debt. Who's going to really want to push back against the system in the future when you can just be canceled? One wrong tweet, off you go. Mm-hmm. You know, sorry, we know you don't represent the values of the company. Whatever question you ask on whatever platform is not congruent with our ethos and our beliefs. So therefore, off you go.
Yeah.
You can go live in the woods somewhere, which, you know, is surprising. You know, it does happen. Like, you know, when kingdoms fell, people went back into the mountains to find refuge. Like it's a little bit like that, you know, like you can either be part of your smart city and listen to what the king says or off back to the woods you go. Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, that's what Ted Kaczynski did.
Yeah. And you know, it's repeating itself. Mm-hmm. You know, I can really see that. But yeah, I think there's something there about the feudalism and stuff. And we're back to, you know, the whole sort of you'll own nothing and be happy. You know, it's like, fuck you. Like, why? Yeah. How dare that even come out of your mouth? You know?
Right.
But yeah, doing your own research, like there are good ways of doing, like very good ways of doing your own research online.
Yeah. It really is a sense of David versus Goliath at this point, though. Just in the sense of, like, all the things you mentioned, where you need these tools to sort of do your jobs and compete in life almost, and you need to follow the rules to some extent. So, and there's only so many hours in the day, so it does come back to this point where you're like, okay, how do I effectively do my own research and make the right choices for me when everything else is pushing me in the other direction?
When it's important enough, you know, when you have like, God forbid, an illness or something, you start to do your own research. Right. So one thing I've heard before is don't walk into a doctor's office and assume you know everything, but also don't walk into the doctor's office and assume they know everything. The truth has got to be in the middle somewhere. Right. You know, and if you're working with a good doctor, they should understand that they don't think you're. I've watched my own doctor turn onto the computer and Google something while we're having like a conversation.
Right.
And you're telling me not to do my own research.
Yeah.
You know? Like,
Well, but I think the difference...
that's so hypocritical, though. I know you're going to say the difference is they know
Well,
what
there's
they're
a
doing.
background because I think people will... Okay, I'm going to give you this example, and I know you know it. I've told you this before, but I don't know if I've said it on the show. But it's a good example, I think, is that a while ago, I would say, I don't know, 10 years ago or something, I started having these like what are called vesiculations, which are like little twitches in the muscles where it was just, they come out of the blue, and I would just have them in my arm, and then I would have them in my wrist, and then my like leg and everything. And it was just all over like my neck. And I would have them sporadically throughout the day, but it wouldn't be like once an hour. It'd be like once every 5 minutes. And then I'd be like, oh, like there it is again. Like there it is again. It was just over and over again. And I really I was, Googled it online. This is actually, Google was around and everything. So I was checking things out online. It was like everything was pointing me toward ALS, which is this like, neurodegenerative disease, which will eventually, Stephen Hawking, ALS. It was... I was pretty sure I had it. Like even the other sort of symptoms of it, I was I think manifesting to some degree. And I was to the point where I was on forums for ALS, figuring, okay, these are the people I'm going to be like with for the next 6 months before I die. And I was like, how do I guess I have to set my affairs in order, which is ridiculous considering I don't really have any affairs to set in order. But, and I was really planning on that. So I went to the doctor. They didn't know what it was. So they passed me on to a neurologist. So I was like, I had the appointment with a neurologist. So I was terrified to go in there. I finally went in, and the neurologist ran some tests, and and then he's like, "Yeah, I can't find anything." And I'm like, "Well, what is this?" And he's like, "I don't know. It's probably all in your head." Or he says something like that, right? Like, and I was like, "Oh." And then as soon as he said that, I went outside, and I swear it was like I didn't have one fasciculation after that. Like it was literally just all in my head, and
sorry, please, yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say. So that's my research led me completely down the wrong path because it never really occurred to me that it was just all some sort of psychological, like, I don't know, maybe I had that first one and then, so I was like willing myself to have these or something. It's really strange.
Yeah, but on the same side, you could talk about long COVID all day long and everybody's like, do I have it? I don't know. I mean, obviously there is a thing called long COVID, but how much is it like just in your mind? How much is it physiological?
Yeah.
So I think that can go two ways. Like you could just hear, like people have different diagnoses and stuff like that coming through, and you start to, there's a psychological term when people study in like medicine, and you start to feel like every new thing you're studying, you think you actually have.
Is it like Munchausen's or?
Can't even remember anymore. It's been 20 years since I heard it, but there is an actual underlying thing there. But okay, but it ultimately, it didn't hurt the world that way. What happened?
Right. No, but I mean, I think there's the perils with doing your own research are the fact that if you've got a one-track mind and you're Googling something and you have a few symptoms,
you're going to convince yourself.
You're going to convince yourself, and you don't know that there's other things that maybe, I don't know, there might be 10 reasons listed, and one might be kind of a throwaway. You think there's a throwaway at the end. You didn't do enough
research, because then you could have found the psychological underlyings that caused you to do this.
Yeah, that's the thing. You
need more research.
But that's the thing. I mean, yeah, sure. You could go to medical school, and then you can see patients all the time, and then you can kind of rule things out. Yeah. So there. Now, I'm not saying it's not important to sort of be prepared, but it's like it's really hard, I think, for somebody, especially for their own illness, to go in objectively and look at something and kind of, almost robotically.
Of course, but if you hang around long enough in a tattoo shop, you're going to get yourself a tattoo. So if you're hanging around with a neurologist long enough, you're only going to get neurological answers. It can be a much larger, broader spectrum, or you have to ask, go get a second opinion. Yeah. That's probably the ultimate form of research, is just go to experts from many, many different opinions.
Sure.
And experts outside of the actual regulating bodies that you went to originally. It's like, that's why I went to Europe or Asia and asked a doctor over there.
Right.
They're still an expert, whether they're completely maybe trained in a different philosophy or different drugs or everything else could be, just not analogous to what your experience is here. But here's how I do my own research. If I want to do something medical, and you don't, like, you're right, like jumping on the TikTok, horrific. Like that's not research. Instagram, that's not research. But if you want to, there's PubMed. You go to, the web link for PubMed, type in, you find all the research papers that are peer reviewed about the topic you're looking at. That's amazing. And it's not that hard to understand a research paper. Like initially, like, oh God, what is this?
It is a little bit hard.
But there's an abstract, there's a methodology,
Yeah.
there's a conclusion. I always recommend looking at the supplemental data, because this is a little nefarious, but a lot of times what they actually come to in the conclusion through words is not corroborated by the actual data. Things can get a little funky like that. So then you gotta, it'll show like no efficacy in the data, and they'll write, oh, as we know, there is efficacy. Like, what's up with that? So you're dealing with like organizations that really are largely operating on grants, and those grants come from sometimes sources that they don't want to say anything bad about. So you got to just take a long time to go through that. So there's PubMed, there's Google Scholar. Have you ever tried Google Scholar?
I haven't, no.
Don't go to Google and type in something, go to Google Scholar, and it'll bring up all the research papers, and you can rank them and everything from newest ones that have come out or most viewed and everything else.
Yeah.
And then the third one, Cochrane. You go to the Cochrane and library online, type in, you can find every like giant meta-analysis of from vetted researchers. And then with that information, you go to your doctor and go, well, what's up?
Right.
Half the time, I bet you will come with more information on the specific subject than the doctor really knows, because they can't possibly know everything all the time.
But that's the thing, because you're going to a doctor, and it's they are generalists, so it's like they'll know a little bit of everything maybe, and
or even in your case a specialist, but they can't know all the latest research. What if the paper came out 6 months ago?
Right.
You know?
Yeah, but you're assuming though that you're able to, like, I mean, unless you're obsessively researching this stuff, and I guess you're talking about, so if you have an ailment and you're going to be researching that, 8 hours a day or whatever, then like.
Yes, doing your own research isn't quick.
No, it's not quick, but it's also, I mean, it might not be feasible. I mean, if you're talking about something that's really like, you think you have ALS, okay, like it's worth it to kind of, invest the time. But how does this extrapolate out to, for example, I don't know, the COVID situation or gender identity, something like that? It's like, is somebody going to spend that much time like, let me find out what this is all about and what the...
how much of gender identity kind of like it was in, I don't want to say it's in people's heads in a sense, but on that point, the NHS in the UK, when they come to a gender reassignment, they basically say to you, we can't operate on your brain and you feel like you're a woman, let's say, but we can change your body. So let's make your body be more in sync with your brain.
Yeah.
But what they're really saying when they say that is that we know it starts in the brain. It's interesting, right? And we don't have the knowledge to operate on the brain. If we could then change how you perceive yourself in your head to match the body instead of having the body match the head. That's literally what the official experts say there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like for instance, when it came to my, like I had to do my own research recently, like last, I don't know, about a year ago or so, I had high cholesterol. So the doctor was like, well, do you want to go on statins? And I'm like, well, if food got me into this issue, can food get me out? And she's like, well, are you really going to change your food? Give me a chance. Like, let me prove you, empower me sort of thing, instead of taking the power away.
Right.
And most people are like, well, kind of like the energy, like, well, I should just listen to the expert. How am I supposed to do anything? So I went home and I just basically researched how can you lower your cholesterol through exercise and diet. Changed a bunch of things. So 6 months to the day I went in and I had dropped my cholesterol down from 7.5 to low 5s, just starting in the red zone. And she was like, wow, like, how did you do this? Did you go on medication or something? I'm like, no, I just did it all through diet. And that was it. She didn't ask me, what did you take? She wasn't interested. I was just one anecdotal story. But if she was truly curious, if she was doing her job, if the curiosity in science was still there and not bred out of her, she would have asked, what did you do?
Maybe
they ask you everything else. Like, how's the wife? How's the kids? How's your business? You're not going to ask me what I ate.
But she's also on a time constraint. And
she asks me a lot of non-medical questions when I'm there. She's very nice and social, but she did not go there because we have a nice rapport on this particular. So I think that's her training. Her training is basically guiding her back into the cave. Like, don't look left or right. Cholesterol, statins, that's it.
But I would also say that in the same way, it's like, what is the average person going to do? The average person is going to not change their diet,
for
right?
now.
No, but yeah, if everybody starts doing their own research, but this is something that is like, this is like an actuary table, right? Yeah. People are certain, like doctors are certain that X number of people are not going to change their diet. So the solution is statins or whatever this thing is, right?
Yeah, but people didn't, if you went that approach, everybody would still be smoking. At a certain point, the doctor can help you train new habits into you and encourage you.
Well, I'm not saying that they shouldn't. I'm just saying that that's just the state of where we are today. Like, if you can go, like, I went to a naturopath recently, and I was shocked to hear how much she seemed to know about the body and what was happening. it's really interesting when you start opening up your mind to different, like acupuncture, for example. Like I don't, it doesn't seem to work for me, or I don't get it. It doesn't make any sense to me. Like, but I've gone to them before, and there's a whole, industry built around it. Like it works for some people. So you can't argue with the end result, right? Like you can say it's placebo, you can say it's this, but I don't think you can, I don't think you can, if you're being honest with yourself, you can say that this whole, like, I guess it came out of China, but this whole industry is just, it's all the placebo effect. Like they're doing something right. Like we just don't know what it is. So it's like this different view of looking at sort of the same problem that they may have a solution.
That's what I was saying. You have to ask different experts in different medical bubbles.
Right. Yeah.
For sure. And the internet's the easiest way to do that. Like, well, what did they do in China? Why do we have fluoride in our water in North America? Okay, cavities. And why don't they have fluoride in Europe? Oh, so did they have more cavities in Europe? They just a little bit. No, they don't. See, like, why do we have fluoride here?
Why? Well, maybe it's because we eat a lot more sugar in our diet, because we allow a lot more.
Well, they started this in they're putting fluoride into the fluorination into our water well before we started having all these sugary drinks. When did it start? Like 1940s or something?
I don't know. Like that's why I drink Perrier and San Pellegrinos.
Yeah. But like my point is, you can look at different. So what? They're experts there say one thing, the experts here say something else. Or what is the vaccine schedule in North America versus the vaccine schedule in other parts of the world? And what are the rates of measles and polio in each place? You know? Like you need your control arms in each group. And that's where when you look outside your own bubble, you're going to get the, correctly, you're going to get what different medical experts are doing outside your own little siloed way of thinking. So that's actual diversity.
Right. I think that the main problem here is either time, people just don't have the time, or sort of a, I don't want to say laziness,
but they use that against us. Like, you don't have time, just take this pill. Everything will be okay.
But a lot of the times they're right? Like a lot of the times it does make sense to just take the statins. So I have a few sort of points that I think, if you really want to do your own research, like I don't know if it's sort of an appropriate time now to bring this up, but
anytime.
So I think that I sort of was trying to think about what it was, because I do think it's important. I do think there's a balance. I think we're going into this new age. This idea that you're just going to trust in the institutions is insane at this point. Like, we can't trust our institutions to tell us
captured.
No, yeah, virtually all of them are.
Yeah, financially, ideologically.
All the big, media outlets, newspapers, everything is in some sense
when
captured.
Pfizer puts commercials on CNN, are they advertising products or are they just buying influence?
Yeah, who knows?
Because they're not. They don't care about selling their product. They got a built-in market.
Right.
They are just making sure that CNN won't do any research against Pfizer.
Right.
That's what they're really doing. And they're putting it right in front of your eyes.
Well, it's probably a symbiotic relationship, because then it's like,
of course,
they're getting the people who trust CNN will also they'll have that association with Pfizer being something they can trust.
But what they really don't want is independent journalism or journalism in general going after them. So I'll just give you so much money, you don't dare go after me.
Yeah. No, it's a good strategy.
It's got nothing to do with selling something in a commercial. Have you ever looked at
it's like,
drug? Look at this,
I always used to wonder why. Like that's actually an interesting point, because it's not just them, but it's like, you see, I don't know, like Bell Canada or somebody like advertising. You're like, well, like, I mean, I guess that's like if they're advertising for phone service or something when there wasn't any other option. It's like, well, what are they advertising for? Like, you already got in your market.
They're buying real estate in your mind. That's what they're trying to do, and they want to make sure that it's the prime real estate, top of the food pyramid.
Yeah.
I'm going back though. There was an article in Nature, like that's very reputable organization, and it was the main cause of scientific paper retractions. Conventional wisdom says that most retractions in papers in scientific journals are triggered by unintentional errors. Like they didn't mean to do, peer reviewed, caught it. But actually they found that wasn't so. According to one of the largest ever studies on retractions, let me see here. 2/3 of retracted life science papers were stricken from scientific record because of misconduct, such as fraud or suspected fraud. And that's journals sometimes soft pedal the reasoning behind it. So it's just like they know they're lying. because they want the grant money.
Yeah, it's
So then the doctor is going to read those and take them. So literally like 2/3 in this particular case, you can't trust. 2/3 of the retractions were due to fraud.
right.
So when I was telling you earlier, looking at the supplemental data versus the actual conclusion, they can really be way off.
Right. It's interesting though if they're actually putting, I mean, they're putting the correct results in. Like the problem is like you almost need a statistics degree, or you need to know something about statistics to even understand how some tests work, right? Like the methodology behind like blind versus double blind and all this stuff. So it's like a lot of it, you almost have to do a lot of research as to what you'll need to research. And it's...
Your instinct can kick in. Like during the COVID modeling, everything was like the greatest disasters in terms of numbers never came true. And then the apologists would be like, well, with modeling, it's never an exact science. It can go a little this way, little that. But when each and every single time it's skewed in the same direction, that's intentional. That's misconduct. That's fraud.
Yeah.
You know, you could ask, why are they doing it? What are the grants? What's the reasoning? What's the political structures behind it? You know, so you have to do yes, you can learn the actual technicalities, but you can't you also have to keep your eyes open for general patterns that seem to be repeating. It's a little bit like an IQ test. It's really just finding patterns and seeing what happens.
Yeah.
Over and over.
Yeah. If you're really paying attention, I think you can. So I've got these 5 rules that I mean, you know, I'm sure you could take one out or add another one in, but I was able to boil this down to 5 rules that I think are important for doing your own research. The first is just to learn as much bare facts as you can. So there's a difference between, there are things that are just factually accurate, right? There are, like it's just a thing that is like math. There's a lot in math that is just, it just is what it is. I mean, you know, and you know, take out any kind of outlying weird like quantum physics, or like there's always sort of exceptions in some weird outlier kind of way to some things. Like so you have to separate what is that which is fact from that which is opinion. I guess the point is that you need to learn as much bare facts as you can, and you start on those with those axioms, and then you move out from that. If you have those bare principles and those bare facts, you can build something that that you can grow outward. Does that make sense? Like, it doesn't sound like your face, and it sounds like it doesn't.
I understand. I'm just saying though, like the mere act of a human observing something is kind of like a little quantum physics will change the outcomes.
No, but I mean, but that's what you have to kind of get away from. Like, you have to be able to trust your senses.
Well, then it becomes a little bit, is science faith?
But so when I'm talking about, so this first point is almost like, we're not talking about things that are that subjective, right? Like you could say, like, for example, like climate change. I mean, you know, you could argue about whether it's, you know, the facts are in and everything like that, but like that, it's a more complicated question. Like I'm talking about like axiomatic principles. So you're talking about like 1 + 1 = 2, like this whole bullshit where it's like, oh, math is racist and everything. No, math isn't racist. Math is math. So like you have to start somewhere, and you have to start with that, like those fundamental principles. Like if you want to survive in the world and just like move forward with life, instead of like, you know, sitting there in your fainting chair, just like conjuring up all these possible like what ifs all the time, then you need to have some sort of starting point.
I understand. You build on each piece of knowledge, sort of thing. Of course. And you know, the more science that's happening from more different parts of the world, from more diverse groups of people, the better average of an overall answer you're going to get. Yeah. So that hopefully will average out all the different little nuances between each person. But it takes a long time. So that's why when we worked at warp speed, or the science is settled, that's the least scientific thing you could ever possibly say.
I agree, but you have to have a reason that you're arguing against. I mean, okay, so let's just go to the second point here, is like, you want to be able to expose yourself to different mediums and different perspectives. So it's kind of a nice segue into this. You have to be able to kind of be confident enough. You have to be, I guess, humble enough, really, to expose yourself to the other side, or to some different perspective.
Of course.
To be able to like really arrive at the right conclusions.
Of course.
So,
because to that point, here's a little expression. Because a lot of people, they want to stay in a little bubble. So to avoid being wrong, we end up staying wrong.
Yeah.
Because you just don't want, because you're afraid. So I'll just hold on to my beliefs, even though the asteroid's about to hit the planet. No, it's not. Sort of
right. Yeah, like, and it's okay to, not be certain on something, right? This is something that we've kind of gotten away from. It's like everybody has the answer on like, I don't want to dead name X, so I'll call it X, but like it's like everybody feels like they have the answer, right? They all, and you don't always have to have the answer to everything. It's okay to be like, well, I don't know about that, or I don't have enough information yet. And it just seems to be like kind of a perspective that we've lost. But I think so. Just moving on from this is just this third point in how you would effectively do your own research is that you need to develop kind of rings of trust. So they have this sort of in computer science where you have like ring 0, ring 1, ring 2, and ring 0 is like, the kernel, or like you would have the most trust. So for example, you would trust maybe your eyes and ears and like things you've seen or experiences. Like if you're in a war zone and you saw, Hamas massacring, like some Jewish settlers or something like that, you could be like, oh, it's like I saw that happen. Like nobody's going to tell me that didn't happen. So ring 0 would be that. And then ring 1 would be people that maybe are in the public domain that have a reputation that they want to protect. So that sort of like a reputation that they want to protect, but have also been proved to be correct in the past. And it's almost like it's like they should collect points in your mind to be like, I have a tremendous amount of trust in, for example, like a Jordan Peterson. Like I really think that he is striving for the truth. And I think that I don't think he speaks out of school. Like sometimes he'll make a comment that's a little like maybe ugly or something, but I don't think that he's intentionally trying to misrepresent anything. Mm-hmm. And there are other people that I feel that. I think that Brett Weinstein
There's nothing wrong with getting something wrong.
Right,
the person's intentions are only but the best.
Right.
And it's the intentions.
Yeah.
I think. Is it to make money? Is it to corrupt people?
Yeah, or is it just to keep your podcast going, right?
A criminal organization can get a lot of things right.
Right.
But it's still a criminal organization.
Yeah.
And a benign, let's call it a church, let's say, can get a lot of things wrong, but it's still trying to do the best for humanity.
Right. And like there are a lot of, YouTube channels or podcasters or Twitter handle it's like they know their crowd, they know the people that are following them, and they know how to tweak whatever it is to sort of inflame them. So it's like they keep getting their social media
the funniest thing is when they have these little polls inside their like 30,000 followers, of which 99% think exactly like them. And like, do you see that's how the whole world should vote? Right? It's really, in a sense, dangerous because they've built their own little cult. Mm-hmm. And then they just keep bouncing it and just reinforces. And you talk about rings of trust. How many rings do they have?
Yeah, exactly. Right? So they would actually be on ring 4 in this situation. Well, but so anyway, like, so the next ring would be like friends and family that may be less trustworthy or may not know enough about a certain topic, but you at least trust that they have your best interest in heart or whatever. So you kind of move out from that. So then, the further out you go, the less trustworthy something is. But you can kind of build a network of trust so that maybe if you don't, maybe I don't want to research the war in Ukraine and find out, okay, what do I have to know about this that do I have to now research the history of these two countries and, let's look at the budgets and where the money went and this and that. It's like, well, or you could just sort of, if you have some podcaster that you listen to that, you've trusted for other reasons and they have a reputation to protect, maybe you put some of your trust in that and then you can kind of feed on that. And it doesn't mean you're an expert in the field, but at least you can have an opinion on the matter based on stuff you're hearing from that and be fairly confident that you're going in the right direction. I think I'll just brush through the last couple of ones. So like number 4, I'd say you need to recognize the difference between fact and opinion, sort of more really like kind of like number 1. It's the same thing. And then number 5, which I think is important, is just learning how to organize your data, because it can be overwhelming. I'm sure because you certainly did a lot of COVID research, and it's hard to, like, you've got to keep that stuff somehow like, literally organized so that you can reference something in the past. It's like, it's like, well, what did I hear about that study that time and where did I hear it? Like, you've got to be able to go back to that so you can kind of inculcate that information into your mind.
And when you do, because I do have these debates on X, they lose their shit.
Oh,
they don't expect, because most people don't. A lot of the anti-vaxxer crowd are just like memes, and they throw memes up. Like, you're not going to win like that.
Yeah.
And if anything, you have to be extra. If you're in the position of David, you have to be extra organized, because Goliath has their shit organized and they got way more studies proving what they want to prove right. So every little study you can find is like literally your slingshot.
Right.
So you don't want to show up to that fight without the most amount of rocks for your slingshot possible.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, for sure. But like, would you not say like not doing your own research, people who promote that are basically just telling you stop reading? And how is that ever going to be good for humanity?
Yeah, I agree that that's not good, but I don't necessarily. I think some people maybe are saying that, but I think like, you've heard Sam Harris.
I think a lot are, sorry to cut you off, I think a lot, like we're going to take this down, we're going to put that up, we're going to block it, you're going to put a little sensor thing on it. Like there's a lot to say, turn away, don't go here. Good people don't read this. You get your little fact checks that come up, which of course are sponsored by very dubious groups and not particularly, you can just check the LinkedIn sometimes of the researcher and find out they're like a defunct journalist that hasn't done anything in 5 years. Like it's just ridiculous,
Yeah, I do think that exists. And I think we saw a lot of it during COVID. But I think there are some people that are genuinely, like we've talked about Sam Harris before. I think he'll talk about the perils of doing your own research. And I think that he genuinely believes that it's a dangerous thing to... And I think what he's talking about is also that same thing with a balance. Like, yeah, sure, do some research, but don't no longer defer to experts in areas or domains that you don't have an expertise in.
Yeah, ultimately, I think I don't know how you feel about Sam Harris. I've listened to a lot of him. I enjoy him. I think he's got a position, he's got a seat at the table, But for me, his position largely is he doesn't, how do I say it? He really doesn't know what he's talking about, I feel like. He's very calm. He tries to be logical. He tries to like keep it simple, but ultimately his complexity of his thought is so basic. Maybe that's what makes it appealing, because it's like, well, yes, of course. There's no spaghetti monster in the sky believing in God is just ridiculous. Like I just find he cherry picks the most straw man arguments of the other side. He never goes full in for the what's the opposite of straw man?
Steel man.
Steel man. I never see him full on keep steamailing. Whereas someone like Jordan Peterson always goes after the other person's best argument.
Right.
And you can see this directional energy thing. And so when I keep seeing him hit below the belt, it's like a boxing match. Like really, you keep going below the belt,
I mean, I don't necessarily agree with that. Like, I don't think that I'm not sure I've heard him do that on a regular basis. Like, I've always enjoyed the Harris Peterson debates, and I think that I don't know. I think there is certainly a part of Sam Harris that is his elocution is such. His mastery over the language and his sort of the way he relates stories and his timbre or whatever, like he the way he speaks is such that it's easy to listen to. True,
but during those debates, for sure, you have to bring all your weapons to the table. But ultimately, when I see him debating someone like Peterson on whether there's a God or not, and I've watched them several times, Peterson was actually not so eloquent. He was kind of bumbling around, but he was searching for the truth in the debate. Whereas I felt like Sam Harris was trying to win the debate. And that's the cheapness of it, I find. Was he looking for a truth, or was he just trying to show that he's right?
I think that might be
the weakness of his arguments.
But I don't think I think the point of that is that he already has had that. He's already done that searching, so he's not wondering anymore. He's like, for him, whether he's right or whether he wins the debate is the same thing, right?
Because he's taking, in a sense, it's very easy. His position, taking the atheistic position is far easier than saying I believe in something I can't prove, right? So, yeah, like he's already, like I just find it cheap. Like he's like, I've taken the easier answer and I don't need to think anymore. But no wonder he's not into doing your own research. Whereas Peterson is still actually struggling to figure this out. He's doing more reading on the subject. He's wrestling with the idea. And the other guy's simply like, well, I don't need to prove anything because you're the one that's postulating there's a man in the sky. I'm done. I always find that such a cop-out. It's literally the most hardest question on earth. You're like, well, since you can't prove it to me, then I just don't really need to do much more. I'm taking the scientific route. Come on, bro.
But I think he's hit a point. I mean, I think going down that study, you hit a point where you're out of, like, what else is he supposed to like, what is he supposed to be exploring? Like,
Well, he didn't even play with Peterson's ideas so much. He wasn't like, well, I understand, but, and then like trying to show why it could be wrong. It was just it just felt very grade school.
I mean, yeah.
The Leafs are the best, and I'll tell you why. And it was like very simple. But you haven't won, like, well, tell me, and Peterson's trying to figure out what makes a team better, and the whole league, and this what created hockey to begin with. Like, it's a whole complex thing. He's like, well, the Leafs haven't won 67. Your team sucks. Like, it's very simple, his approach.
Well, but you kind of go down I mean, I would say that if I'm arguing with, like, to take the atheistic perspective for a second, I would say that, you can talk all you want about how in the Bible this happened or that happened, and what about this and what about that. And it's like, yeah, but at the end of the day, you're still stuck with the same absurd proposition that God exists, and you just have to believe in him. And I don't know how much dancing around, like how much of yourself can you really invest in somebody else's sort of fantasy, like in taking that perspective. Like, I happen to believe, like, I'm not atheist, right? So it's like, but I can certainly understand as somebody who is atheist how it would be hard to say take any of that seriously and be able to properly, like, indulge it.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't feel he's acting in the spirit of true academia. I think he's just taking a very simple. He's following status quo. Back to that. I think his is the status quo answer of the age, and that's why he's made it up to top. I don't think he's actually earned himself a space. He's deserves a space, but he hasn't, like, truly, like, because he has something to say, and he's part of the whole intellectual dark web thing. But I can't say he's truly earned it. I've never been wowed by a thought from Sam Harris.
I mean, I think he's a great speaker in any case, and I think he has some interesting points. I don't know that there's been. I mean, he's not Eric Weinstein, or what I mean. Like, but he does have an interesting perspective on.
Yeah, and you need him. Like, you need everyone at the table. Like, if you're going to take a classical liberal approach, you have to bring left and right and everybody together. But he would agree of tweets like this, Sam Harris. So Pfizer had a tweet. Okay, like, this is almost verbatim. This is verbatim. Pfizer tweet, wouldn't it be great if a few internet searches could land you a PhD? Thank goodness for real scientists. You can literally hear Sam Harris in that statement.
Yeah.
And do you like that statement? Does it sound like a scientific statement to you? Does it sound like it's going to empower the individual?
No, but only because I'm cynical toward, like, I think the idea of there being sort of real scientists, like, there are legitimately real scientists. Like, most people don't know how quantum physics works. Most people don't understand, like, data science, right? Like, it's so you have to do.
The essence of that tweet is shut the fuck up. You don't know what the hell you're talking about.
Yeah, because a lot of people are out there on Twitter, like, saying
they shouldn't be so easily. So here's another one. It should be, you could reverse that. Wouldn't it be great if scientists today weren't so easily defeated by a few internet searches?
Okay. The point, though, I think being made with, like, I certainly understand the cynicism hearing a quote like that, but you have, you're running into a situation. Okay, so for example, like, let's get away from COVID, because I think let's talk about climate change, or
sure.
not going down. Yeah, any topic or
doesn't
whatever.
Matter. Yeah.
So with climate change, I mean, you're taking it from the people who are saying that this is the most urgent subject that we should be talking about, and, like, my God, we've got to shut down all of our gas-fired power plants and everything like that. It's like, if other people are coming back and their retort to that is simply, no, we don't, communist or something like that, you're not going to get my money or whatever. It's like, that's just a lazy argument. I think that's what that's addressing. Is there's a lot of that out there where, and it builds momentum. Like, you could say that Trump's whole base, like, there's a lot of his base that is kind of that mindset where it's like, but
that dummies on one side, they exist on equal distribution on both sides. Christine Lagarde, I don't know if you saw, the IMF chairman, I don't know.
Right.
Christine Lagarde, she said at some symposium in Europe last week about climate change, and it's the existential threat of our generation, in which all the things we need to change. And at the end, she goes, we even have to get rid of banknotes. So, like, basically paper money, paper, trees, climate, really. Like, so someone suggests she's the expert. What am I going to sit there? Like, doesn't set off a radar at that moment? And yes, it gets down to conspiracy theorist route. Like, oh, they're going to make it a cashless society. But she literally said, we're going to get rid of. So you're supposed to just turn off your brain at that point?
No, but I think you can.
They experts know what's better for us in this digital age. What's next? Shoelaces? How about all the Uber Eats that brings box? Yeah, like everyone's got shoelaces. Velcro's the way to go. You just being alive is going to have a detrimental effect on the earth. Let's say. Right. So that's where she's there. She's talking. She's got the most perfect hair, beautiful, always a nice tan, speaking eloquently. And you just literally said to the masses, we need to get rid of paper money because of climate. And if you follow the Sam Harris approach, basically he's like, well, shut up and just listen to the expert. But
again, I just think it's more nuanced than that. I think I don't, like, you can always cherry pick. There's always somebody who's saying something that is...
but she's a high,
Sure, and I'm sure there's things she's... Like, first of all, these people aren't perfect, and they'll say things... Like, first of all, I don't know that I believe that it's some sort of agenda that's being pushed. Maybe it is. I'm totally open to that idea. But it's... You can also hear somebody talking... Like I'll say some things that are just like, I'll be like, I wish I didn't say that, or I phrased that wrong, or people are going to interpret that the wrong way.
Pre-planned written statements.
Right.
I don't even know if there's such a thing as conspiracy theories, rather than in terms of Christine Lagarde and climate and banknotes, like converging interests. And when you put enough people together where the interests converge around a single idea, it just takes shape ubiquitously, organically, and it just happens. I think that's the magic of it. You're not going to find the person behind a curtain with the little piece of paper like, haha, these are my plans to destroy the world. Like, it doesn't work like that. Because if anyone really wanted to do that, they'd be putting themselves in danger's way. You let everyone else do it for you.
Yeah, like I'm all for people having open discussions about maybe we do need to get rid of banknotes for climate, but let's talk about the reasons for that, and let's hear an open debate. And like if
she just dropped the bomb.
Right. So if somebody's like saying that, it's like, I'm okay with that proposition as long as people are able to counter that, and then we get to hear them, and it's not just dismissed as conspiracy or this and that, right?
It was like the high priestess talking to the masses. Or in a different way, if you go back to sort of the feudalism approach, the king who has the authority of God is using the villagers of pitchforks going, you're going to not trust what the king says, like the supporters of the king and him being one with God sort of thing, not knowing that those pawns, those villagers are being used as pawns to protect the power. And is it a conspiracy theory? No, it's just converging interests.
Right. So something like that, how do you do your... Okay, you can...
It's again, just to stay on that, it's like you watch the Medici on Netflix at all, the whole Renaissance and Florence and Florence versus Rome. But it's very interesting. Like, you think in those powers, the church was the ultimate power then, and they wanted to maintain that the world was flat. And they used every expert out there, like, to shame everybody, to like use them to protect their power, right? So it's really just about using other people to protect power.
I do think it's funny that people...
Not doing your own research. That's why that's why doing your own research really empowers the individual, despite the risks are worth the gains.
So it's funny though, because if you talk about that and you're doing your own research back in those days, and you're like, well, wait a minute, I did do my own research, and whatever you're calculating, ballistics or something, you're like, yeah, the Earth is clearly round. So then, what benefit does that give you other than you become almost like a Cassandra, where you have this knowledge of a different way, and nobody's going to believe you anyway? Like, the people who are doing their own research nowadays, just like back then, are the ones that are just castigated from society.
Exactly.
So it's like,
they're not following status quo. So they're not going to get promoted for doing this. They're standing out, saying the king has no power.
So how do you...
The emperor has no clothes.
Right. How do you get a mass of people to, like, it's sort of like, it's like we're going through the same pantomime again and again with the same sorts of results. Like those in power always sort of remain in power. So like what's the antidote to that? Like what's the thing that's going to break? I mean, we're in this time of transitioning technologies and everything. Like in many ways, we have more information than we've ever had before, more exposure to stuff. And I feel like if any time there's going to be a break in that power structure, it would happen at a time like this where everything's still sort of in transition. Like they kind of haven't figured out how
they're trying to pull it back in. The genie's almost to get out of the bottle. It's almost Enlightenment 2.0. And the church, meaning power, is trying everything to bottle it up, of which I would say Sam Harris is one of the chief instigators of that.
The chief priest.
Yeah, the chief. He's the, yeah.
But I think, I guess, and I hate to keep coming back to the Sam Harris thing, but it's like, I can't help but like there has to be people, like I believe Sam's intentions are good. I just might not agree with him in a lot of ways, right? Like, so
I agree. I don't think he's an evil person.
But I think we have to be able to have people that we include at the table for, like, we have to be able to disagree with people, disagree with a lot of what they say even, and still listen to them.
Of course, but that's doing your own research now. And making sure you don't fall down an echo chamber. Like my dream app, let's say for X, is at the end of the month, they would give you a little readout, personal, 100% your own privacy, but you've been reading tweets, let's say, that have been skewed to this side. Would you like to read some tweets from the other side?
But how would you define the side? And like that's...
Well, let's say they have to, when you create a verified account, let's say, you have to like push a meter where you find yourself aligned or something like that.
Right.
So it's like all transparent, like I'm sort of center, 6 out of 10 center right sort of thing, And then you could even build in gentle incentives. Well, if you want premium, you can just pay a little less if you actually spend 15 minutes looking at the other side. If you want free, go ahead. Just, you just get ads on there and you can do whatever you want.
Right.
And you give the person the gentle nudge without really stepping on their toes at all. And treating them like an adult. Like make your own adult decision, man. They might not like it at first and resist it, but over time, like, you know what? And I really enjoy the back and forth I have. Even when I'm for 3 hours, like sending 1,000 different posts back and forth, I enjoy it because occasionally I get good pushback,
Yeah.
It's painful. It's like going to the gym. It hurts, but you come out stronger.
Right.
And I think that pain, and that pain can be excommunicated from society, excommunicated from your job. We saw it through COVID, excommunicated from whatever, there was things like, should we treat people going to the hospital if they didn't get vaccinated? But you have to be willing to take the pain in order to grow.
Yeah.
And I don't think that resilience is built into people anymore.
I think it's amazing how people, like, everybody will say like, oh, history repeats itself and that kind of thing. And yet people always think they're the exception to the rule, and they always think that the time they're living is the exception to the rule. Like during COVID, it really was the same mentality as Germany in the late 1930s, right? So like it's that same follow the science, follow the leader, like this is what we're doing, everybody fall in line. And
you think the Germans didn't have all kinds of statistics from the experts about why the Jewish people were bad?
Oh yeah.
Right. They had data to show them why they must leave. Right? And the German people, for the most part, were an educated population at that time. So they were easier to be indoctrinated and trained to hate other people. It's almost like you need to have a little bit of that Rocky Balboa instinct ignorance in you sometimes, and to temper it with the indoctrination of things, right?
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, but I mean, so yeah, like I think that you have that these days, and it's kind of like, I don't know, it's a real uphill battle. Like how do you sort of put a stake in the ground and say, this is the way? Like we really did have that challenge with COVID, right? Like it's like I tried to do it, right? Like I put my stake in the ground. I'm like, I'm not taking this vaccine. Like I know it's a bad, I just don't feel right about it. Like the research I've done, it's just not my thing. And then of course the pressure, and then finally I'm like, fuck it. Like I want to be able to live my life. Like I'm tired of, so I caved in the same way. Maybe I would have been one who would have said like, yeah, like, okay, sorry. Like I liked you as my neighbor, Jewish person, but
the pressure is real though. Like when we watch movies like Braveheart, everybody idolizes that I would be just like Braveheart.
Right.
The day he died, everybody was standing there in the crowd cheering him on to die.
Yeah.
But the crowd is the masses, and he died lonely.
Yeah.
there's that moment where when he dies, the Irishman's, everyone else's eyes kind of drops in sorrow or sadness. And do you remember the scene, what happens with his eyes, the Irishman?
No.
A good old Catholic. His eyes opened wide. Everyone else dropped their heads. And I think, you know, Mel Gibson's an intelligent man. That wasn't just some random, oh, he acted in that particular way. They were showing us that what the Irishman noticed that no one else saw is that he was witnessing revelation. He was witnessing God. He was witnessing why we are alive. And the word that came out of Braveheart's mouth at that moment, as he died, his last word was freedom. And no one else, they felt shame that they couldn't be as strong as him. So they dropped their heads. And the Irishman realized what the fuck he was watching, you know? And very few people in the moment can do that. Most will drop their heads and follow status quo and move on, right? I'm supposed to hate Jewish people because that's what the ruling party and experts say. Fine, I'll move on, right? It's very hard to stand up and you have to be willing to die. You have to be willing to sacrifice everything. They really will push you to that limit. So never feel bad if you went as far as was logically possible and then have to cave. If everybody just pushed back as much as you, they would never get anywhere. In fact, if just 10% of the population was pushed back, that's all it requires.
Yeah,
but that's why tyranny grows in silence, and that's why speaking and sharing and quote unquote doing your own research is so important, because they want us to be silent. They want us to be like the crowd and just put our heads down.
It's funny though. I mean, because with the COVID thing, like I did do my own research, and I wasn't 100% sure that the vaccines were not safe. I felt more comfortable saying, you know what, I don't want to do this for me. Like people can do whatever they want, but I don't want to do this for me. And I also don't like the pressure. I don't like the censorship. Something's up and I don't like it. So I might have done my own research. I came to the right conclusion, or what I thought was the right conclusion at the time. But then I still caved because of the pressure. So we're sitting here talking about people doing their own research, but maybe it's something more than just the knowledge of, like, you need to do your own research and then have the courage of your convictions, I guess, to some extent, right?
Get comfortable being lonely, in a sense. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, there's a reason why monks go off in the mountains by themselves. You know, they're not they're not with society, in a sense.
Yeah.
They've walked away from all that. Yeah, there is. And maybe that's the sort of thing we need to train into our next generation of kids even more. I believe it can be trained into people. It's inherent, but you can grow and nurture that part of our, I was going to say soul, but like our reaction to things in the world.
Right.
But they do everything they can to try to get that out of us. And that's why I really don't like the pronouns. It's very much a Marxist game. They're going to use language against you because it's like taking the knee. Once you accept the pronoun, then you have to accept everything else that follows. Like, it's very psychological, you know, and to draw that line. You know, they're going to use words like kindness and diversity and inclusion. They use those words against us. And in this case with COVID, they were using the, you know, community and help the other person and don't kill grandma. Like, it's a very tricky game to push back against that.
Language is so powerful and it's so easily wielded against someone.
Yeah,
you know,
especially in game theory. They're going to give you two options and neither of which are going to be good for you and make you feel like you have the option. But really, there's a third and fourth option. They don't want you to know about that. You know, there's no way of knowing if we're always being watched in all these sort of decisions we make in our life, but they want us to live with the assumption that we're always being watched. And then they control us, or actually, we don't even realize it. We are controlling ourselves.
Yeah.
That's the magic.
Yeah, that's the ultimate goal, I think. I mean, you know, assuming there was an ultimate goal. That would be the ultimate goal of a theoretically totalitarian entity.
Yeah, you just do it. I hate this expression because it's not always true, but it's like you get the government you deserve. So it really comes down to you and what kind of world you want to build.
Yeah.
You know, I would really call something like the Freedom Convoy in retrospect like Enlightenment 2.0. It was very hard to go out and do that. People like, what did they sacrifice? There were a bunch of domestic terrorists. And did you see the news lately about the one guy in the balcony? And they found out that he was actually like a liberal guy.
Oh, no.
There was a guy on the balcony that went viral and he was screaming obscenities at the truckers and kind of went viral. And no one ever knew who he was. So he ended up becoming like a pretty notable liberal. So now the liberals like, yes, do you see that? That's a Canadian heritage moment. You are shouting down the truckers, not realizing that the people are there because they are experiencing tyranny.
Yeah.
They turned the victim into the tyrant.
I think still that moment, the truckers convoy, what a monumental moment, I think, in Canadian history. Like, I think we haven't even sort of appreciated it yet.
Oh no,
enough,
because the CBC and everything has crushed it and turned it into like our insurrection.
Yeah.
Did you watch all the latest federal court ruling?
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know if
It's
all
just, because most people aren't following that, right? So,
well, there was the initial inquiry that came out like a year ago. It had one single, let's call it a judge, who was a liberal person, and even he had said,
I could see how reasonable.
yeah, I can see how a reasonable person would come to a different conclusion with this sort of information. So it was very wishy-washy, but he gave a rubber stamp on the actions of the government.
Right. And the actions being like seizing bank accounts.
Yeah, for those who don't know, we have like an Emergencies Act, and it's basically the thermonuclear option where the government has all powers on everything, including freezing bank accounts of people who have not been either charged or convicted.
Yeah. Some real
Unbelievable, right? So, and none of this means that the truckers didn't need to be removed. The question is whether the methods in which they removed them fell under were they...
Yeah, is it something local police could have done?
Yes,
or is
yes.
they need the federal government
and everybody came out and said, we had this. And the proof is in the pudding because the Ambassador Bridge, which ties Windsor to Detroit, had already been cleared up. Mm. And the Coots one in Alberta had already started to be cleared up. Now, you could argue it was more entrenched in Ottawa, but nevertheless, this is the thermonuclear. So there was a federal court came to a decision about 2-3 weeks ago, so at the end of 2023, early 2024. And in this particular court case, several, I believe, citizens took the government to task.
Yeah.
And it was this judge found that, he said, with hindsight, I can understand the difficulties the government had in coming to this decision, but with the benefit of hindsight, it was the wrong thing and they violated Canadians' charter rights.
Yeah.
Outstanding. Even if they take it to an appeals, that will always last in the books.
Right.
And he even said something to the effect of, even I didn't realize the true nature of the convoy. And when I actually interviewed and got to speak with these people, it was completely not what was portrayed on television.
Right.
So he had to literally do his own research. He was told not to, though.
Yeah.
Just turn on the news and follow it. And when he actually spoke to them on a human level, he's like, no, this wasn't tyranny. This wasn't Nazis with flags. This wasn't people who wanted to take down the government. These are people who are being denied organ transplants because they didn't get a COVID vaccine.
Mm-hmm. Isn't it amazing? You just mentioned that about him doing his own research and finding out, because when I read his decision, I was surprised. I was like, of course that was the right decision. Of course that was a violation of Charter of Rights. Like, when it was happening in real time, the two of us who were doing our own research were like, you could see how egregious this was. You could live stream the stuff that was happening in Ottawa, and it was like, well, these aren't at all how they're being portrayed in the mainstream media. You could clearly see the difference in that. And it's not until this person did his own research, this judge, that he also came to the same conclusion. But it's interesting that even a federal judge can be sort of duped by that. I think when you're really enmeshed in this, like when you're really doing your own research, you can really sometimes be shocked at that disparity. Like,
well, isn't the judge can be one of the hallmarks of somebody following status quo?
I guess, but I usually think that people like judges and sort of that upper echelon of society kind of know how the game's played and are kind of like...
Or then it's willful ignorance.
Or maybe he, I don't know. Maybe he just said that, level, he's kind of like... I don't know.
But the media portrayed one thing. It's basically like the church saying these all people need to be excommunicated, or these are all the Jewish people in Germany, we have to get rid of them, and finding out it's completely not the way it was portrayed. Not that there wasn't problems or issues, of course, but again, the point of this podcast today is like doing your own research. That was such a giant moment, and the centralized power that told you we will be your single source of the truth was lying.
Right.
Right. So what option do you have? You have to do your own research, and take what comes. Like, because if we allow truth to be centralized, then that is a system that can be far too easily manipulated by evil characters, if not now, in the future.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting to think of, for example, this judge, and for all I know, I really hope our judicial system is, they're actually looking at cases and, basing their decisions on the law. Even though I think a lot of our laws should be changed, but I do think that it's important that the judicial stays unbiased and is doing that work, and they could very well be. But I also think it's interesting that the tide is shifting to some extent, and this stuff has been normalized. Where it's like, I think a lot of people now, like certainly way more than at the time, think that that seizing bank accounts was obviously the wrong thing to do, and like calling in the Emergencies Act is probably the wrong thing to do. It almost makes me think of like, Germans in 1946 or, after the war that are just, it's almost like they shake their head like a dog would kind of shake their head,
like
kind of like
hysteria.
Yeah. And then they're like, whoa, what was I doing there?
Do you know what's going to be the pivotal factor in the future of humanity? And in terms of this research and the empowerment or disempowerment of the individual, the cell phone. Because the cell phone is literally your supercomputer to talk to anyone on Earth, anywhere you are, and share information in real time. Or it can be your digital ID, where your driver's license, your blood work, your vaccination, your banking, your digital currency is there. And it will be the greatest psychological manipulator living in your pocket and getting you to do things that you don't even realize you're doing, because a notification pops up and tells you, well, you need to spend your digital currency in the next 30 days or it will be worth 80% of the money because of diversity.
Right.
We're going to put 20% towards climate change, so there's a deadline. Like you can start manipulating habits to a individual level that has never been seen before.
Yeah, like once mass adoption of CBDCs comes to place, like it's, I think, game over. Like that's why, again, with Bitcoin, like it's such an important revolutionary thing. And I actually think blockchain, we didn't really get into it, but will be really important going forward in this new age in terms of authentication and in terms of like people having identities that you can know sort of unquestionably that somebody is who they say they are. A video is what it says it is.
It really comes down to like that technology has to be out of the hands of any one centralized authority. Mm-hmm. So either way, imagine, so you can now have like, a global currency. It's either going to be decentralized and you have no countries, metaphorically, or it's going to be centralized and it's going to be one country for the whole world.
Right. Yeah.
It gets to the same result, but in completely different ways.
Yeah.
And I really believe in the decentralized approach. So I'll just sort of like end on this. Like, I think we've kind of hit a lot of good points, but the truth doesn't require censorship. I just let it go, and if some bad stuff goes through the sieve, is that what it's called? The sieve? Sieve? Yeah. Okay. If some stuff makes it through, right? Yeah. It's funny, you read words a lot, but you don't
I know.
play with them in real life. But if some bad stuff makes it through, it's far better that the individual decides that than some centralized authority. And then that's the point of education, to teach people how to really do your own research and to always question corporations and your governments, not to just take them at like because this whole tying in of like social values into like every corporation now has to be like the new church. Look at us, we're doing so much for the community. No, just, did my money go in the bank? Is it fine? Like, you don't have to solve world problems.
Right.
So they're just making us, like, in a sense, adore them, right, through their actions. And the same, so to be skeptical of all that, healthy skeptical, to keep teaching that at the ground level all the way through. It's kind of like the reverse of what Yuri Bezmenov would say, in terms of active measures and changing the population over time. We've had this sort of way of thinking of over-centralization and deferring responsibility for a generation or so now. I think it's time we start the slow road back to empowering the individual from kindergarten right through the end of the university years, so that in 20, 25 years, when all this technology has matured, it'll be strong-willed, independent, healthy people calling the shots.
Right, yeah.
I think that's the way back.
I'm so skeptical that will be the case. But,
well, why would they want it to allow that?
Yeah.
Power, and this is where being critical of governments, power likes to collect more power. One thing I think the United States got much more right than us is the whole term limits. Like, you can only be twice,
Yeah.
I used to not like that as a child. I'm like, well, let me decide who I want to vote for. But now I understand power wants more power. So we need to start instituting laws that limit the roles of government, not allow it to extend to like climate change and the WHO and these organizations that supersede the nation state. You know, like it's really becoming a whole other, when we said rings of security, we're getting a whole other ring that's wrapping around the earth right now.
Right.
And we need to break that ring the fuck down to the individual level. And of course, there's collaboration and sharing of information, but not power structures that tie you into actions you may not want to do.
Yeah.
As a nation and as an individual.
Yeah, I think corporations are really just as bad as governments at this point. Like you mentioned
fascism.
both, but
they're one and the same right now.
You know, I got my I got a Tim Hortons coffee on my way over here, which is like, and it was the usual kind of mediocre yet strangely nostalgically satisfying coffee that I always have. But it's I saw the banner. There's a picture of all the Tim Hortons employees. It's just like it was like a little picture like up, and it was like posted up by the cash register. And I looked at it, and it was like I think 6 people on it. It was like I think 5 women. It was just showing all these sort of Tim Hortons employees, and it was like everybody was a different color. Yeah. You know, it had the one had the turban.
Perfect distribution.
Yeah, there's like one woman who clearly looked like maybe she was queer, like she had spiky hair. It's like,
what the fuck does that mean?
Isn't it crazy?
Man?
They're just going in. It's like so because there's board meetings on this. Mm-hmm. People are like, okay, like, what are we going to do? We got to represent, we got someone there for the queer community in there. Like, what about this one? Let's make their hair a little spikier so people know that.
We got one of those.
Yeah.
We got one.
Isn't that
a new form of slavery? And these are basically their slaves going, we own these images and we're going to sell them to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like literally you're selling me an image of a person's race or gender or sexual preference to make me buy your fucking water.
Right. And it's such a shame that this has happened because now I can only view it cynically. Like I never think to myself, oh, they're just trying to represent their
exactly.
Like I always think it's like, no, they've had some nefarious board meeting where they've set up like it's just this pure corporate like let's check these boxes because that's what people want now and we'll sell more product.
We were watching a movie a couple of weeks ago, my wife and I, and it was a 90s movie and it had a nice distribution of genders and races in it. And I'm like, do you remember when we watched this movie? I'm like, what a nice, cool movie.
Yeah,
it wasn't
exactly.
forced in the least. It was just like, well, that's an interesting character. That's a good actor. Though I like the way they fleshed it out. It looks like the world we live in.
And it was like the last thing you thought of, like back then. It really was.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, totally. And nowadays, you can see it's the first thing they think of. Mm-hmm. It's like this is gonna supersede character development, story, actual acting ability. Mm-hmm. We need to have this right. And I honestly, for me, it's a new form of racism because all they see is race and nothing else after. You know?
This is why I find myself just watching old movies. Like I'm not interested. Like there's nothing. I don't know. The quality is shot down, and I'm always on the lookout for things like that now. It's just unfortunate.
Yeah, it just feels fake and forced, and you're actually using these poor people's races to sell an image to like cleanse your soul. It's like something probably like what the churchman would go around in the Middle Ages and pay this amount of money and we will let your soul leave purgatory, sort of thing. That's your new carbon tax. Pay this and you will now go to nirvana. Yeah. Anyways.
Yeah.
It's interesting, right? It's like some form of social repentance.
Yeah.
That's how I see it. We erred in the past.
Yeah, but it's not, I mean, if it was even that genuine, it wouldn't be as bad.
I agree.
I would still sort of be against it because it's like, well, I didn't do anything or, whatever. But I would at least appreciate that. I was like, okay, I can understand that. But it's now been co-opted by corporations and governments to be like, oh, this is how we can control people. This is how we'll.
Every nation needs its origin story, and they're always full of lies, of course. Mm-hmm. But when you start to then try to tell the next generations, maybe 100 years, 200 years later, it wasn't quite like that, and maybe we embellish some stuff. Don't go too far where then nobody has faith in the actual country they can call home. Because now you're going to just have degradation of everything. Yeah. Like new immigrants that want to move to, let's say, Canada, are they going to be as proud as previous immigrants? Yeah. Well, this country, colonialism and now we know things, Mm-hmm. And it actually really hurts social integration.
Well, I'm sure you followed, I don't know, it's kind of off topic actually, so I don't, but
that's all right.
I'm sure you followed in Canada where they did that recent change in students coming to Canada.
International
students. Yeah. So I had no idea there were so many international students that were coming to Canada, and I guess this whole market had developed where these major institutions were pairing with like, shopping mall, colleges or whatever they would call them. But like basically people would pay their inflated tuition fees, come over to Canada, and basically they could work simultaneously while sort of pursuing their education, and then they would get a degree, and they'd, I think, be able to work in Canada for X number of years after that, or something like that. Or there was some sort of it was basically allowing a lot of people to kind of come over to Canada and also work on the side, and saying nothing about the people who are doing that, because like that's, to me, pretty ambitious to kind of do that, and are also working in this and that. But the problem is like, it's just, this is what's created. There were so many of them, I guess, that this really contributed to the rise in house prices and, the unaffordability that people find in Toronto.
You can have too much of a good thing.
Yeah.
So I heard this started because here in Canada, they put a cap on tuitions a couple of years ago. And then they also reduced the amount of subsidies they were getting from the government, because here in Canada, a lot of the university education is subsidized by the government. So then that put a financial crunch on the institutions. So they started hunting for more international students.
Yeah, because they can raise that. I think I heard somewhere that it was like, 6 times higher or something like that. It's crazy.
It's just not cool. And they're just, again, like when I was all about like saying building the next generation of leaders, the fish rots from the head. So we need to start fixing education immediately.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So like I guess this is where we need to figure out in this podcast. I find that we sometimes go down. We get a little away from the subject. We've got to try and make it more compact. But that's on us, folks. Do you have anything else to say on this? Doing your own research?
I'll give you a nice quote.
Great. I love a good quote.
A state of war only serves as an excuse for domestic tyranny. And that's Solzhenitsyn. Solzhenitsyn, yes.
Yeah.
That's a great one. A state of war only serves as an excuse for domestic tyranny. Yeah, I like that one.
I don't know if I agree with that, but...
Yeah. Well, we're in a constant war against climate. A war against information.
I guess if you're using war,
it all started with a war against drugs, war against terror.
Right,
it's like the Infinity Wars.
Yeah.
And as long as you have that pressure on, it only forces everybody, because at a state of war, your senses are heightened, so you're going to keep your head down and just stay status quo. It's a way to keep us in status quo. That and debt slavery, but that's a whole other show.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for listening today, folks. And please... if you like this podcast, share us or tell your friends about it, or like it or subscribe, or do whatever those things are that gets our audience up.
We hope you enjoyed it.
Yep. Have yourselves a good day.
Take care.